Admissions ADOS team. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Lisa Piero, who is a graduate of Harvard and Yale, and Ms. Athena Lau, who has completed her education from Harvard and UPenn. I won't take any more of your time, so over to you, Lisa and Athena.
Can you all hear me? Or... Are we back? That's always a good start when one of the presenters is present. So sorry about that, everybody. Let me know in the chat if you are having any issues. Welcome, everyone. So welcome to our presentation. My name is Athena Lau, and I am one of our presenters along with my colleague Lisa Piero from Admissionato. And we are really excited to talk to you all today about admissions to graduate programs, especially in the US, and to talk about some of the trends and some really important tips for this process. So the way that this is going to go, we will talk a little bit about ourselves so you know who's coming at you. And then I will talk about some of the context for admissions around this year. Lisa's going to get into some of she's going to give you all the really important pieces of advice. So that's when you want to get out your pen and paper. And then we'll talk about ways that Admissionato specifically can help you. So just to make sure that you're all paying attention, let me know how you guys are doing on this Friday evening in India in the chat, just so I can make sure you guys are all with me. And my apologies in advance for any technical difficulties. Hopefully those will be very mitigated. Okay, all is well, great. I love to hear it. I'm doing fantastic too. With MBA and college admissions. So if you know anyone who's also interested in undergrad, let us know. But today we're really going to focus on what we really love, MBA, master's, and PhD admissions. And so if you have any questions, there's some way to get in touch with us, and also our website if you want more information. And so just a little bit about me. My name is Athena Lau, and I went to Harvard for undergrad, University of Pennsylvania Graduate School of Education for my master's degree in international educational development. My parents were Filipino immigrants, but I grew up in the States. I've also had the great fortune of traveling to India once in 2019 before the pandemic, so feeling very fortunate. I never say no to naan, but I tried all sorts of delicious dishes when I was there and in India, and I hope I can go back really, really soon. So Lisa, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi there, everyone. I am Lisa Piero. I'm originally from New York, and I currently live outside of Boston. I did my undergraduate at Yale and my MBA and my doctorate at Harvard Business School. My focus was in marketing. My fun facts, I actually was the last person to graduate from Harvard Business School. It was the November of 1999. So it was not only the last one of the century, but the entire millennium. So that was my exciting thing. I've spent my time during the pandemic tracing back my ancestors, and I traced back to my 14th great grandfather in Italy. So that was, I consider, a real accomplishment for someone who hasn't been able to leave the house. So I'm really excited here to go through a lot of this material with you. I'll be answering some questions in the chat pod too while Athena is talking, and then we'll reverse roles. So back to you, Athena.
Thank you. Okay, so let's do this. So first, I'm going to talk about this big picture in our continuously COVID world. As you know, we're still kind of in it, hopefully getting out soon. And then we'll talk about the different kinds of programs and specific tips for each kind of graduate category, and then how we at Admissionato can help. Okay, and we'll also have a little time for Q&A. Okay, so you're all here because you want to pursue graduate studies abroad. So you're wondering, how do you do that? And so we always like to point out that there are these perennial big challenges. And even with COVID-19 and everything that's happened in the last year, a lot has changed, but some things haven't changed. And so we know that in terms of international applications and the number of applications from India, that's still on the macro level. For graduate programs, although there might be some variety that Lisa might talk about for each different category. But in general, you have to be really resourceful in the hunt if you're looking for financial aid. Also, standing out in your personal statement, really making that connection between you and why that graduate program is the best fit. That's always one of the most important parts of this process. And finally, related to what I was saying earlier, there are a lot of applicants and the competition I've been told you guys lost me. Let me know if I'm life was definitely turned upside down for everyone who was applying and starting in the academic year 2020-2021. And in particular, for master's and PhD programs, we're seeing that a lot of social science and humanities programs have been paused. The sciences continue to grow, but really depending on the department, a lot of times, we're facing very limited, much more limited spots than we had before. And that might be affecting your ability to even find a good faculty fit at this time, depending on the program you're looking at. But for the MBA, continuing to program up tier of competition there, but there are also more hybrid and online programs. So if you're looking for some flexibility or maybe looking for a little bit of a different experience than you had before, then you're more likely to find that now that the pandemic has forced people to think about that variety and options. Also with testing, we saw that in the short term, a lot of schools were giving waivers or going test optional, and we'll see, it remains to be seen how much longer they'll continue that kind of in the future. So of course, you might be wondering, well, Athena, please get out your crystal ball and make some predictions for us, because that's what we're here for. And I'm sorry to disappoint you, but no one can really get out their crystal ball and tell you exactly what's going to happen when you apply, and especially if you're applying for the September 2022 matriculation. No one really knows. But our kind of hot take here is that we are seeing a surge in people applying and wanting to go back to school. So that a lot of the tips that, the big perennial tips that we have for acing your application still hold. But maybe there will also be more spots and more different kinds of options in the way that you approach graduate school than maybe you had before. So just because everyone loves visuals and they're really useful for understanding what's going on, just a reminder that on the macro level, the number of international students, the percentage of that share for US enrollment is continuing to increase. There have been a few little dips here and there, but we're thinking that that share is going to increase in future cycles. So make sure that in this process, you take a deep breath, you don't panic. And if you've been spending a lot of the year at home, use that time to be productive, to prepare what you need for applications, and really take a look at all of the options available. Okay, so all that said, the rules for getting into the top schools haven't changed that much. So we have a lot of classic pitfalls that we really, we see this in a lot of our applicants, so we want to make sure that you avoid it. So for example, you'll say, just they're doing. Please don't do that. Because when you just copy what your friend is doing or what you've heard it has made for a successful application, you're actually not being true to yourself and not really reflecting on what makes you a great fit and what will make your application successful for the school. Also, you might have a lot of people in your life who really love you, care for you, and want to give you all the advice. So we call this having too many cooks in the kitchen. So it's really important to kind of differentiate from who's just wanting to share their advice, but doesn't really understand your unique context and reasons for going to graduate school, which you'll have to write about. So that's something to avoid. Also, a lot of times applicants misunderstand what really counts in your application. Lisa will talk about this more, but for the MBA, that work experience that shows in between your undergrad and why you want to pursue more advanced business studies now, that's very important. And for master's and PhD outside of the MBA, the research, the academic experience, that's really what's going to make people look at what you're presenting them. So, and finally, failing to present the story that ties it all together. Everyone loves stories. And so we want to make sure that your story really stands out and leaves an impression in the admissions committees and faculty members' minds when they read it. So yes, the granddaddy of all pitfalls, great-grandmother, whatever ancestry you'd like to have, is viewing admissions as a contest of who looks the best today. So here's what I mean by that. A lot of times we say that, oh, okay, well, I've done this, I've done that. I was the best salesperson. I won this prize in this international competition, this research thing, whatever. And a lot of times, I'm very proud of you. I'm clapping for you. That's wonderful with all the achievements you have. But just because you've done that thing, just doing that thing is not important in itself. What's important about the achievement is implying what you can achieve in the future. So one way that we can sort of think about this is this metaphor of a rubber band. So imagine that you and your wonderful accomplishments are this rubber band at rest. Okay, just a regular rubber band kind of hanging out, being super flexible, fluid, whatever. That's how you look like today. But schools don't really care about that. But if you stretch out this rubber band and you think, okay, what can this rubber band do? That represents your application, what you could be doing tomorrow in the future. So another way to say this, they do not care what you have done today just because you've done them, but they're thinking, how does this person communicate that these things that they've done are proof that they can succeed in the future at our program and beyond in whatever career they pursue. And why would universities, programs care about this? So there are many different reasons, as you can see on this visual. They care about the reputation, they want more applicants. The higher caliber students that they have, the more success that these students are likely to have from using the resources in their academic programs at the school. The more visibility and publicity a school gets, the more people think, wow, this school is prestigious, I want to apply there. And institutionally, that is in the school's best interest to get all those applicants and to get the best caliber of students possible. So it's a virtuous cycle if they can pick the right students, and you have to understand that you want to be part of that virtuous cycle from the institution's perspective. So basically, this is not a contest of where you've been and what you've done up until this point. A lot of people approach the admissions process this way, but that's wrong. The achievement itself does not matter. What really matters is how this signals your ability to keep on being successful in the future. So if you only remember one thing, although we hope that you'll remember everything, remember that your application is not just about what you've done today, it's about what you can do tomorrow and how you can signal that you will be a future success at the graduate program of your choice and beyond. Okay, so now that I painted that picture, how do you show that in your applications? I will now turn it over to Lisa. Oops.
I'm going to start out, we've divided this up because the picture that you're going to paint will be very different when you're looking at a master's or PhD program versus an MBA program. So let's spend some time first talking about the master's and PhD programs, what they're looking for, and how you want to start to think about your application. So next slide. We are focused. We've put this here together as a 5-pointed slide, just to give you a sense of the different areas you need to make sure that you're focusing on in developing your story. So the first is a scholar's mindset. So master's and PhD programs are focused on bringing aboard scholars that will contribute to the research in their field in the future and reflect highly upon the university. So you have to demonstrate that you think like a scholar, that you solve problems, that you're not afraid to dig deeply into research, that you're open-minded about how to approach different problems with different solutions. Teaching and education, so a passion for that overall. Academic achievement is critical, and that doesn't matter whether you've been out 2 years or 10 years, you need to show that you have been able to succeed in a rigorous program before. The advancement of your work up until the point that you apply. What have you been doing to demonstrate and to advance your own understanding of the field? And that also is part of research accomplishment. So if you're applying to one of these programs and you have research that you can share that shows that you have worked with leading scholars, that you have published in journals, that's going to be the kind of thing that's going to be really important. So let's move to the next slide and talk a little bit more about how you show your success. So with a master's or PhD program, what you want to do is you want to focus your application on what I call the value added activities. Some of the other things that may be appropriate for MBA programs in terms of various volunteer activities or clubs, they may not be as important because the master's and PhD programs, they are focusing on those 5 points that are going to define what a scholar, a contributor to the community will be. You want to make sure that you can do as well as possible on the GRE and TOEFL. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. A high GPA. And as an undergraduate, if you're still in that time frame now and thinking ahead, you want to make sure that you continue to take advantage of every research opportunity you have and identify faculty that you can continue that work with. And then, as we'll talk about too, writing a killer SOP is a statement of purpose, a PS is a personal statement, and those are really the 2 key essays in master's and PhD programs. So let's move on and dig into these areas. What we don't want to do is, as we're applying, think about trying to be everything. Okay, you don't need to think about pursuing extracurricular activities that other people are doing that aren't really tied to what your passion is in this area. You don't have to focus too much on developing alternative areas of academic interest. If you're really focused on biology, pursuing art history is not going to really add anything to your application. You really want to be deep, focused and deep. And that's not saying if you've become, you've achieved some incredible accomplishment in those outside areas, of course you want to include it. But if you're at the point where you're trying to allocate your time to best position yourself for future programs, these are the things that you really want to make sure you choose to focus on and not focus on. Let's go ahead. There we go. Can you move us along? Okay, so I think that Athena is frozen. So in the meantime, I'm going to talk to the next slide, but I can't advance it. So the next slide, I really wanted to focus on the GREs and the TOEFL. So some schools do have minimum cutoffs, and it's quite high. So the GRE quant score for engineers, you need to be in the 90th percentile at the top schools. I think I lost her. So I'm going to just continue talking. And if we don't get Athena back, I can put some slides up. But we're talking about the GREs and the TOEFLs. So if you have a really strong GRE score, it can make up for some of the other areas because it really does show your potential. The TOEFL for MIT, for example, we want a 100. Stanford, it varies, but we need an 89 minimum. So don't overlook that. And you want to make sure that you really focus on demonstrating that. And if that requires some extra work before the exam, it's definitely worth your time to put into that TOEFL exam. Let's move forward. So oftentimes, if you're taking the GRE, you will start to do better in your practices and take a couple and do better. And then you might just hit a ceiling and feel like you can't get beyond a certain point. And what's really important is that sometimes you do need some outside help to get there. And that's what a mentor can do. So if the mentor is going to be able to isolate exactly where your problems are and help you push forward on those weak areas. So a good mentor really can improve your score and make a difference. And so I would, if you feel like you've hit a ceiling, we really do recommend reaching out for some very focused help to help you make that jump to that next level. Let's move on. So a GPA is really important. But if you are concerned about an overall GPA, I would tell you that you really want to focus on the GPA in your specialty. So going ahead, if you're a biology major, your GPA, your performance in those biology classes is going to be the most important. Okay, your GPA is going to have a big impact on your funding opportunities, to be an RA, a resident assistant, or a teaching assistant. And it will also be your inroad into competitions for scholarships and fellowships. So the GPA does come into play. It's very important. Remember, in master's and PhD programs, they're looking at they want somebody who they know is going to be an academic achiever. And past performance in academics is the best indicator of future performance in academics. So that's something to think about if you're an undergraduate now, that really focusing on that GPA. If you've gone beyond that and you have a GPA that you wish were a little higher from your undergraduate, then you have to think about how you can bolster up other areas of your application and really make that convincing argument that maybe the GPA wasn't the best indicator, but there are other parts of your application that really do demonstrate your potential. So let's move on. Just a list here of some research activities you can think about. One of the really key points I would like to emphasize is working with somebody that will really give you a sense of responsibility. So you want to choose faculty members that have research interests that align with your own, that are well respected and well connected in the field, but you also want someone who's going to invest in you and give you the opportunity not only to learn, but also to showcase some of your own talents. And so that takes a little bit of work and a little bit of your own research into finding someone whose research interests align with yours, but also somebody who's going to present you with those mentorship opportunities that are really critical for you to move forward in your own research. We can move on. Okay, so now the next thing that we want to talk about, you want to make sure that your research activities are consistent. You know, keep going through. And even if you don't have an opportunity or time in your schedule to do a formal research assistantship, you know, focus on being engaged in the broader research community, publications, You can find a number of different outlets for your research, be involved in competitions, opportunities to present, even if it's just a poster at a conference. So you really want to maximize your opportunities to get exposure, to get feedback, to make connections. So, set up a schedule for yourself to consistently engage in those activities whenever possible. Okay, let's move on. So your relationship with professors is essential. And, I will be one to say that I chose my doctoral program based on the faculty that I would be working with. And that is critical to your success in a doctoral program. And often, when you get to a PhD level, you may not be choosing entirely based on a school, but based on the people that you would be working with, because that's going to be the key to your success. So as you're going through this process and preparing and thinking about what your trajectory looks like, focus on making connections with professors who you think can be long-term mentors, and work on building a relationship. And remember that faculty members are interested in developing their own research, right? They have their own research agenda. So you have to present yourself as somebody who can help them as well. It's a two-way road. So they're not only giving you opportunities, but you're allowing them to be more productive. And so make sure that when you reach out to professors, you're able to communicate how much you can contribute. And really focus on finding somebody, as I said, who can be that long-term mentor for you. We can move on. So the statement of purpose, and this is really the core of your essay in your master's application or your PhD application. This is your opportunity to tell them who you are. Your resume shows everything that you've done, but this is your story. Where were you before? Why do you want to move ahead to a career in research? What are you going to do with your knowledge and with your expertise? How are you going to contribute to the research community? And it's very important in this statement of purpose that you're able to tie all these pieces together and really represent who you are and why you are going to be an incredible asset for the school. Move on. Okay, so I'm waiting here for the next slide, and we're going to focus a little bit on the timeline. So what we want to think about is that, you think about when you want to go to apply, so 2 years ahead. So think about building up your application over time, because when you get to that application point, we can't just pull those things together that have required a long build. Okay, your mentor is going to be critical to you in all of these phases. But think about it, set your own schedule to start to think about how you build up those critical pieces that are going to help in your trajectory. Okay, and at the end here, we see your scores, your resume, your statement of purpose. But remember that it starts at the beginning here, 2 years before, with your courses, your research activities, your networking with faculty, doing research with them. So it is important to think about that timeline. Let's move ahead. So now I'm going to shift gears a little and talk about the MBA, which is a different type of package that you're presenting and a different type of trajectory. So again, we're going to focus on this star, but the components of this star are very different here. What business schools are looking for is, one, evidence of leadership. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Somebody who's breaking the mold, somebody different, someone who's approaching problems in different ways, somebody who's self-aware. So it's not a bad thing that you have failed before, but how you can present what you've learned from that is really important. But also at the same time, someone who looks out and understands, what their contribution, how they fit into the world. You want to make sure that you have a good insight for really what is your passion, what do you value most, and be able to contribute that. And then finally, you need to have a plan. So let's dig a little bit more into this. How do you show potential for future success in an MBA program? So future success for an MBA graduate is very different. It's not, contribution to research, but we're looking here at somebody who's going to be a leader in the business world. That's what MBA programs are looking for. So how do we show that? What we want to do is we want to, again, we want to focus on here, the GRE or the GMAT is preferred for the business schools. You want to demonstrate that you have quantitative skills and the softer skills, communication, personal connections, all of the different ways that you are able to connect, collaborate, and work as a team. Your evidence of past leadership at school and at work is critical. You don't need formal roles to demonstrate leadership. Okay, that's really important. It's not critical that you were the president of an organization. If you informally led an activity or a drive, that is fine too. And often examples of informal leadership are more impactful because it's much harder to take leadership when you don't have formal authority. So think about the ways that you can demonstrate leadership or take on leadership roles even without a specific title. And then again, writing a killer application. And those essays for MBA programs may be a little bit different. So what you want to do in your application for an MBA program is you want somebody to read that essay and think, oh my God, I absolutely must have Athena as part of this class, because she is going to make a contribution, not just to the business world and the community, but to our group. Now, remember what I've been talking about for the masters and the PhDs. The MBA is different because they're thinking about each applicant as part of a cohort. And they're not looking at just an individual's potential, but they're looking at how the individual fits in to the class so they can create a well-rounded class, and they want each person to be able to contribute something. So you want an emotional reaction. You want someone to read your essay and be inspired, be touched, just really feel, wow, I need to advocate that this person joins our cohort, because without them, our class would not be the same. So let's move on. Now, I'm going to turn this back to Athena so she can talk a little bit about how Admissionato can help you in achieving either the ideal MBA application or the ideal master's or PhD application. What role can we play in building your story? Back to you, Athena.
Great, thank you. And I apologize again for the struggling technology from the small town where I'm currently located. So thanks for bearing with me. So just to give you a little bit more information about the company that Lisa and I work for. So Admissionato was started by Raj and John, who's beautiful pictures you can see here. And the point of Admissionato, I think the thing that kind of sets us apart is that we really try to combine all of that strategy, the branding, the substance, along with this sort of Hollywood-like communication persuasive style. And that comes out of the history of our two founders, John, who went to Harvard Business School, Raj, who ended up going to film school at USC. So it really took the best of both worlds, and they made a beautiful admissions counseling baby out of all of this. So thanks Raj and John for starting that. And in terms of how we operate, so when you work with Admissionato, you work with a mentor or consultant. We use both of those terms interchangeably. It feels strange to say this, I guess, out loud, but I guess it's very selective. So we're part of that group. But you're paired with a mentor or consultant who might be a really good fit personality-wise and background-wise, and can really help you dig in based on the kind of experienced graduate program that you're looking for. And you're going to be working with that person from start to finish. And in addition to that, one-on-one counselor relationship, we also have a team of editors. So as you know, the essays, the personal statements, that's such an important part of this process. And so as you're working with your counselor, we also have an editing team, and these folks are professional writers. You know, they're really successful in any industry that requires a strong sense of, or a strong ability to write and communicate. So they are authors, they're playwrights, all of that. And so we work closely with the editing team to give you really detailed feedback, you know, sometimes even line by line, to make sure that your essays go from, you know, this very nebulous first draft version kind of free write that you have to something that's really polished and substantive and will help you get into the school of your dreams. So that is a little bit about our model. And I think more importantly, just the ways that we sort of think about this, you can think about this in stages or in the services that we provide. So in terms of stages, you know, we're really focusing on developing your story, developing your profile, crafting and communicating that. So hopefully you heard me kind of repeating that. Future success, it's not about what you've done today or what you've done in the past, but how that signals what you can do in the future. So we really, that's sort of the vision that's guiding us as we go through this. And then finally, we have two services. So there are a lot of different services that we offer, but we have the Junior Deluxe, which really focuses on strategy, action plan, and essays specifically. And then the Deluxe package, which is a front to end service. So in addition to the essays, we can also work on resumes, support for your letters of recommendation, preparing for interviews, etc. So, you know, we're not going to dig too deeply into exactly, you know, all the different parts of these services that we can provide. But really the most important lesson here is that, you know, we want you to make sure you know how to signal that future success that we've kept talking about, that you understand, you know, which parts of your application you need to prioritize. A lot of these tips that Lisa gave about, you know, what is very specific to a master's, PhD, or MBA program. And then, you know, having that we as mentors, we really enjoy having that one-on-one relationship with each of our students to make sure that what really stands out about them, what really is unique about them, shines in their entire application. So that is, you know, really what we were here to show you today. So just some parting words. I think these are also good life lessons that I'm trying to remember myself, is to really focus on what you can control. Right. There are a lot of different factors in this process that, you know, the school might have a limited number of slots in that program that year. Maybe a faculty member isn't available, you know, some other things that you just wouldn't have been able to foresee. It happens. But what you can really bring to the table are, you know, what your achievements signal about you and your abilities, your best personality traits and what you can bring to that program. So really focus on that. And, you know, the fundamentals are still the same. As we talked about, it's still a competitive, labor intensive and a long process. So, you know, be in here for the long haul. We'll be right there beside you. And of course, stay flexible. The world is changing. There are a lot of different kinds of programs available. So, you know, really use this time to reflect on what it is you actually want and open up your mind to the different ways that you can get there. So now we will also, we'll turn to a Q&A. And I'm also looking at the chat. Excuse my mind kind of moving back and forth. So yeah, we will try to answer your big questions about this whole process. Okay.
And you know, we have someone who has a question on the GREs and GMATs. If we could give the name of a mentors, can you tell them how we approach that?
Our team, because you guys know the best options in India.
Yes, Sadapriya, you can ask your question. Just type it into the chat pod.
And yes, so if you'd like to learn more on my screen, which I know is showing, just talk to Manya at info@manyagroup.com or call the number that's on there. and they'll help you on your way. Get in touch with us. Yeah, and for mentors for GRE and GMAT, again, Manya is going to be the best point of contact for that, especially because, yeah, I know that they offer those services or would know who to turn you guys to. I will say also getting a practice book from the companies themselves that offer these tests, that's always a great place to start.
I think, Mohammed, you had a question about visiting Admissionato for master's inquiries. Yes, absolutely. And you can go and look at our site, and we do have free consultations that we can give you and assign you to a mentor that is that has a specialty in your area of interest. So absolutely go and explore and reach out if you have questions.
Yeah, Lisa, do you, so we have a question here about, you know, what are the alternatives to get accepted in a university if academically the student is not strong? So I'm going to interpret that as, you know, say that academically your grades aren't the best. How might you kind of overcome that, or what are some of your tips for that?
Can I just ask that person, are you talking about an MBA or a master's PhD? Because the answer would be different.
Good point.
A master's. Okay, so the issue with the master's is that you're going to have to demonstrate academic achievement. So if you don't have a strong background, you might think about taking an online certificate program or a couple of courses where you can demonstrate excellence there before you apply. And again, is if you can develop a relationship with a faculty member where you can do research, that would be a way to bolster your application. So you really want to focus on those ways that you can demonstrate academic excellence and then incorporate in your essay an explanation of why your performance as an undergraduate would not be a good indicator of your future potential success.
And for MBAs, Lisa, I think someone asked, could you elaborate on that?
So for MBAs, remember your focus, MBAs are not as focused on academics, okay? The top 10 schools, maybe, but we have a broad range of schools and they may not be as focused. What you really want to do is have, be able to demonstrate excellent leadership experience. So if you have an incredible trajectory that you've been able to demonstrate at work where you've gotten some promotions and have some incredible outcomes, if you have commitment to a community endeavor, volunteer work, all of those are great opportunities to demonstrate leadership. And at the end of the day, an MBA program is most interested in someone who's going to be a successful leader. And outside of the very top tiers of the top tier of MBA schools, you should be able to overcome a weaker undergraduate performance.
Great. Yeah, someone asked about when is the right time to ask a college professor for a letter of recommendation?
I would make sure that you ask for a letter of recommendation. So it depends. If it's just somebody you will continue, you're not ready to apply, I would ask them before you're ready to apply. And I'll tell you why. Because you want to be able to connect with that professor and tell them, look, I'm applying to X university for a master's in biology. I would love if in your recommendation, you could focus on the initiatives that I took with this research project or how I worked well in a team. So you might not know what you want them to focus on until you get to the application. So I wouldn't have them write a standard letter of recommendation long before you're ready to apply, but keep those connections, stay in touch, and make sure you can go back to that person.
Great, thanks. And yeah, people have been asking, you know, I'm looking for a master's in X subject, a PhD in this subject, an MBA in whatever specialization. So, you know, the best, and I don't mean this to be snarky, I think the best way is to really, you know, look on the internet and see what's available, because that, you know, use Google to its full potential, but also, you know, use this time to start reflecting on like, what are these learning outcomes that you want? What is the future career that you want? And as you're reading about different programs that have the degree title in them that you're looking for, you know, that will help you expand your search. So I would say that's the maybe initial thing you need to do. And then once you have some sort of working idea, it can definitely diverge, but I think doing that research on your own first is the best way to figure out kind of what's out there. And of course, a mentor can help you through that, but that initial reflection is very important. Lisa, someone also asked the difference between a review paper and a research paper. I mean, I guess, are there certain kinds of academic papers if you're applying for master's and PhD programs that carry more weight?
Yeah, I think original empirical research always carries more weight. And that's the kind of research that will get you published in a more credible journal. However, as an undergraduate, you may not have those opportunities. So starting your career with a review paper is absolutely fine, because that shows that you have a mastery of the current literature. But eventually the ideal thing would be to be part of a team conducting primary research.
Okay. Okay, I'm trying to look at a lot of good questions here. Okay, I guess there's an interesting one that may be specific to MBA versus finance. Do you want to? Yeah. So this person was asking about. So they've done an undergraduate in computer science.
Yes, I see. So
yes.
I think, I think that it's hard for me without knowing you to help you identify what's the better path for you. An MBA will put you in a position for leadership, but it will not put you in a position to have a deep set of very technical skills. So if that's the way that you want to go and perhaps lead an analytics group or a research team, you would want the master's. But I think that what you need to do before making that choice is take a look at the curriculum in these programs and take a look at the jobs that people get on their way out and think about which one fits better with your skills and your interests. I don't think there's a wrong answer, but it has to be one that really fits with where you see yourself in the future.
Great. There are some questions about, which universities are waiving GREs or GMATs. Is this a good time to go to the US given, the number of online courses? And so I would just say, and Lisa, please feel free to jump in. So a lot of schools have said that they are planning to be in person, especially a lot of the top schools too. They're planning to be in person for starting in fall 2021 even. So of course, as I said before, we can't predict the future, who knows? But from what we're seeing, we're kind of returning to normal-ish, as some people say. And I think that, if the schools that you are applying for, if some of them might still continue to be online, it really depends on the school. We can't predict, so you kind of have to keep looking at specific schools about their situations. But on the whole, it seems like we're returning to in-person. We are also seeing vaccination requirements for some schools. I know that Rutgers, Brown, Cornell, a few others have announced that. That also might be changing and might be a consideration in the future. So yeah, keep your eyes peeled to higher ed news, but from what we're seeing, we can be prepared for in-person programs in general. But I think, in a related question, and maybe Lisa, you can help answer here. And I think I'm lagging in-person and online programs. So especially for MBAs, and I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay, so that was a very informative session. Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Athena. That was really fabulous information you gave out to prospective masters and MBA students. I will now hand over to our master trainer, Ms. Nirmala, for the next session focused on test prep strategies.
Thank you, Vikram. Good evening, everybody. So Nirmala here from Manya. Welcome to the second session of the day. So this session is going to be about GRE and GMAT. You all know GRE and GMAT is the first step of your study abroad journey. Today we have two eloquent speakers with us. Anant Rastogi from GMAT, that is Graduate Management Admission Council. And we have Clarissa, Master Trainer from the Princeton Review US. Okay, so we'll start with Anand. Anand is the Director Marketing South Asia at the GMAT. He is one of the founding members of the GMAT India team and executive alumnus of IIM Calcutta. He also holds a master's certification in business leadership and management from Michigan University, USA. So now Anand will let us know why and what is the most important reason for taking the GMAT. Anand, can you please take over? Anand, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. My apologies.
Thank you.
Can you please
Thank
confirm
you.
if you could see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent.
It would be better if it is on the presentation mode.
No, I'm just doing that. You just can
Yeah.
you just confirm this?
Yes.
Super. Thank you
Please
so
go.
much.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining this session on Friday evening. And thanks you to the earlier panelists. I quite like the questions that were raised. Hopefully, I should be able to address a few of them. But largely, when we talk about assessments or a test specifically, we usually see them as a means to an end, essentially about a test getting into a business school. But we often tend to overlook the importance of that particular assessment in a real life situation. Let me give you an example. We have a section, and a lot of you are familiar, it's called integrated reasoning, right? It's all about how you collect data from various sources, how you interpret that data, and then finally make those decisions. So there is a huge requirement for such people today who can exhibit such certain skills, specifically in the context of the disruptions that have been caused by the recent pandemic. And the entire idea of today's presentation, in fact, is that I provide you some perspective around the importance of GMAT and in your college application process and the overall acceptance. So let's straight away dive into the admissions team perspective. Is my next screen visible, please? Sorry, I need a little confirmation and then I can continue to go.
Yes, Anand.
Super. So let's look at the admissions team perspective. So what does your GMAT score do? So it actually provides you a reliable test score, which is science-based data. It actually reduces subjectivity and the potential for any underlying bias. It's also the most accurate predicator, actually, of your performance, other than the data which is available, such as your undergrad GPA scores, particularly when schools are looking at creating a diverse classroom. Remember, people come from various backgrounds, they have various education systems, and the undergrad GPA scores are not necessarily the most reliable, standardized data points which are available. The incremental, and this is a little technical because I'm using what our research team has suggested with us, and this is basis conversations with the various admissions teams. The incremental predictive value of the GMAT actually increases with age, and the raw predictive value of your GPA actually declines as the population gets older, while the incremental predictive value of the GMAT actually increases. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the subsequent slides. The GMAT also reflects your intellectual aptitude, diligence, focus, and hard work, and is a reflection of your quantitative skills and your overall performance. And preparing for the GMAT is actually preparing for a business school, which is an extremely important signal, especially to the admissions team, about your grit and commitment to the GME journey. Let's now look at the candidate perspective. It is definitely a additional data point to the committee, especially if you feel your undergrad performance does not necessarily accurately reflect the kind of person that you are. Your GMAT score will actually help you stand out. This is an extremely important point. If you are actually from an over-representative demographic pool, such as technology, operations, finance, consulting, specifically for candidates from India and China. While your GPA actually may illustrate your academic consistency, it is your GMAT score actually that tells the levels of your mathematical and your analytical ability, your language proficiency, your logical reasoning acumenship, and your overall academic potential. Again, when somebody asks this question, for candidates who don't necessarily have a very strong academic background, the GMAT actually becomes even more important to make sure that the university is convinced that you're ready for the academic rigor. And we've also historically seen that there is an extremely strong relationship between your GMAT score and your performance in the MBA program itself. Also, there is a correlation to your positive employment outcomes. Your IR scores actually help you differentiate both while in admissions and in hirings. And therefore, to just quickly summarize, what are the top reasons for taking the GMAT? It basically helps you stand out. It preps you for the business school. It helps you secure scholarships. It helps you confirm the academic preparedness and demonstrates your commitment to GME, and also helps you secure job interviews. Now let's change tangent and talk a little bit about what's really happening with US schools. And I thought there were a lot of questions around waivers and a lot of schools getting test optionals. So I thought it's a great forum to talk a little bit about this. So we've looked at 3 parameters, and this is based on actual empirical feedback, what we've received from our schools teams, and which basically service the top schools in the US. So we've looked at the environment as a parameter and why some of this thing might be happening, why schools may be necessarily waiving this test, and is it really necessarily meant for you? And this is a very important piece to understand. So the environment currently, and thanks to all the disruptions that have been caused by COVID, there is a lot of pressure. And as you know that, not too much of travel is possible. The international mobility, candidate mobility has been hit. So there is a lot of indigenous audience that is actually applying for such schools. And there is increased pressure. So there's increased competition amongst acting and trying to get from the same pool. A lot of this is again based on university decisions, based on their, so this is not from an optics stand. This is not that every school is waiving it. This is again based on their own decision. If you look at from a why, who is really is it meant for? It's largely actually meant for the domestic audience. And again, an important piece to understand when we talk about these 2 pointers, it's a known fact that there are certain underrepresented community when we talk about the US audience. And I'm talking about essentially, the African Americans, the Hispanic Americans. And traditionally what we've seen that they tend to score lower on majority of the assessments, be it SAT, be it GRE, be it the GMAT. But a large part of this is also, as I said, is because of them underscoring, right, because of their education chain and system. So schools don't want to take any chances. A lot of these waivers are applicable more for the domestic audience. Per se, we've seen also a little bit of fear among testing amongst US candidates, as opposed to when it comes to testing specifically with Indian candidates and Chinese candidates who are not necessarily that agnostic to testing. Since a large set of population, a large set of cohort is the indigenous population applying to US business school currently, which is changing fast. However, to make sure that schools are getting enough candidates from that same pool, some of these waivers are being applied. Let's also look at the third parameter. It's also a very known fact that diversity forms a key part in business school ranking. A lot of these classes have people from diverse classrooms, from diverse nationalities, sorry. And as I said, since travel has been restricted, schools need to fill these seats, right? But then there is this pressure on diversity. And how do you get that? Not everybody is inclined for a hybrid program. So the pool is only shrinking. This pressure, there is actual pressure on budgets. Some of the executive programs have been extremely hard hit. Remember, at the hindsight of it, schools also have a very large deferred pool. That particular pool applied to those same programs with a GMAT score. So all of these are important points to look at when you look at from a waiver standpoint. We also looked into the schools and what are schools saying when we looked at the waivers part of it, right? The media reports something, but they necessarily don't give you the full picture. So we looked at the top 50 programs and we looked at some of the schools. You will see a lot of blank spaces where there are no waivers, but then whenever you look at schools which are offering waivers, let's say look at MIT Sloan, it very clearly, explicitly mentions that it is for this year only. And it's a university decision. Again, Virginia Darden says case by case. And we'll not go school by school, but you can see for yourself, very clearly they have articulated that if the tests are going to be waived, what is that they're going to look at? Let's do a deeper analysis. We looked at Michigan Ross, we looked at MIT, and these are excerpts from the website. Now, no media will ever report all of this to you because all they will say that the school has waived the GMAT and GRE without necessarily explaining or the rationale behind it or what are the schools actually saying. So there is a story behind the story. The schools, while may have said that there is a GMAT waiver, the schools are also saying that the GMAT and GRE are standardized tests, and they are definitely wanting them. But if you're looking for a waiver, then they've also recommended what else they will look at from an evaluation perspective. And that is extremely important for you as an Indian candidate to understand whether you will be able to fulfill all of those criteria. So I will not read through all of that, but clearly schools are also saying that you can apply through expired scores. So these are important points to consider. My only recommendation to you is that don't go by hearsay, have fact-based information, research the site well, understand the requirements that have been laid. A majority of these are made because of COVID. If these are COVID-related disruptions, that you must understand what is the next set of requirements. And here is directly from the horse's mouth. So we had the assistant dean from Yale actually talking about the need and the importance of the test itself. And this is a very recent testimonial that we received from him. And it talks about the same points which I mentioned. How do these assessments help essentially? And they basically validate your predictive performance. They can help us evaluate across broad applicant pools. Your undergrad records might be less strong, and therefore this could be a way to stand out. It will also help you get an award or get a scholarship. And retaking a test can be a positive signal, actually. Let's look at what's happening in Europe, and maybe I will not take you through these slides, but some people were asking about GMAT scores, etc., for their MBA and master's program. Here's a list of what the top schools in UK are asking for. Here is the GMAT score. More importantly, what you must understand is what are the changing visa norms from an employment and a travel standpoint. And that's really critical for you to understand your longevity into that particular market. So as far as UK goes, they're offering a post-study visa, work visa for 2 years. We looked at schools in France. What are they saying? And here are the top scores. And from an employment stand, it says, if you have a guaranteed job at a particular salary, which is set for students, they can remain in France after they study. Without a job, you can stay for 1 more year upon applying for a permit while looking for employment. Again, as I said, very, very important aspects to look at, both the study permit as well as your visa, travel visa. Let's look at schools in Germany, their program scores, and they are fairly open. Germany as a market is very, very open today for skilled graduates. The country has an aging population, but however, do remember there could be certain challenges related to language and understanding of the culture itself. And then we look at other markets in Europe and the Scandinavian markets. Again, a quick list on what are the GMAT scores and the range. Moving on, a very important perspective from an India standpoint. Now, I don't know how many of you know, but the GMAT is actually one of the 6 ratified tests by the regulator, which is AICTE, for applying to all your PGDM programs to your full-time and executive programs. You must have seen a lot of these IIMs accept the GMAT for their executive programs. And then we have a long list of PGDM schools which accept the GMAT. But an important point which people tend to ignore and understand that the GMAT is actually a ratified test, and GRE is actually not a ratified test in India. So the other thing to note is that if you're not necessarily giving the test, these test papers, by the way, are not necessarily applicable or what you're hearing about from an Indian school perspective, so you are basically cutting off your chances if you're not necessarily writing the test. Keep it to the back of your mind, the scores are applicable, your GMAT scores are actually valid for 5 years. So you are necessarily killing your chances by, but by not actually writing the GMAT or rather applying to an Indian business school. Here's a long list of the Indian B schools. This is just, by the way, a partial list, but we do keep getting questions. Remember, these are full-time flagship MBA PGDBM programs that are accepting the GMAT in India. Talk about SB Jain, Great Lakes, IMT, IMI, BITS Pilani, KJ Somaya, TAPME. So if there are added COVID restrictions, you cannot travel, there is enough opportunity within India through the GMAT. And I'm sure things are going to open up soon. But in the end, I would only say, and I would summarize before I get onto the Q&A, that the GMAT is actually an objective instrument that increases the predictive power of the admissions decision. And as I said earlier, it's actually a strong signal that shows your commitment and your grit towards the GME journey. I'll end here. Thank you. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you, Anand. That's really valuable information, knowing that GMAT is helpful for Indian universities also. That's really great. So we'll have the Q&A towards the end. Let us now move on to Clarissa. Hi, Clarissa. About Clarissa, Clarissa is a master trainer from Princeton Review, US. She began her test prep career in Jan 1999, and she mentors students on several test prep things like GRE, GMAT, SAT, and more and more. She has contributed to numerous test prep publications. She is also internationally certified as a master trainer and has trained thousands of teachers. Glad to have you here, Clarissa. Can you please let us know all about GRE and GMAT, about the test structures, sections, scoring, etc., and how our techniques and strategies helps to ace these tests?
Good evening. I'm just getting this up and running. All right. Are we good? Can you confirm for me that you can see the presentation side of things?
Clarissa, we can see your screen, but it is not in full. It's not a full screen.
All right, hang on. There we go. All right, got it?
No, just seeing video.
Was that a yes? Can you see the presentation?
No, just seeing video. Just seeing your video feed, not seeing the presentation.
But why?
It was sharing. It was sharing before, and but it looked like a presenter view with like black background with notes.
Right.
You started screen sharing now.
Yeah, we can see your computer background now,
Yes.
And there we go.
Yes.
All right. I don't know what was so hard about that, but thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for having me with you. My name is Clarissa Constantine, and as Nirmal had said, I've been with Princeton Review since January of 1999, and GMAT and GRE are among the tests that I'm able to support students with. And so today we're going to get into some of the differences between the GMAT and the GRE. You just heard a whole lot of information about the GMAT, its applicability, both here in the US and in Europe and in India. And so we're going to talk together a bit about GMAT and GRE. So if you do have questions along the way, go ahead and put them into the chat window. I do have the chat open, and I'll do the best that I can to field those as we go. So when you're looking at an MBA program in particular, most applicants have been out of school for several years. And so as we were talking about with the GMAT in particular, the test scores become even more important as like the farther away from your undergraduate career that you are. So some of your questions earlier on were, you know, what do I do if my GPA wasn't as good or my undergraduate degree, my grades weren't fantastic? Well, having a really solid GMAT or GRE score can absolutely help to offset that. So my goal today is to get into some of that and help you get a better sense of which test may be a better fit. Excuse me. So here's where we're headed. We're going to understand the GMAT a bit. We're going to understand the GRE a bit, and then we're going to do some Q&A along the way. By the end of the day, my goal is to help you, like I said, have a sense of which test may be a better fit for you. But really, truly, the best way that you can decide is by taking a practice test of each. Some of you may have actually already done that, either on the Princeton Review website or through GMAT or through GRE, and compare the percentiles. The other thing that I would recommend, speaking of having Admissionista here earlier, is asking them what they're asking Admissionista or other consulting companies or the schools themselves, whether they have a preference for one or the other. So I always recommend to students that once you decide which test is the better fit for you, that you do everything that you can to incorporate what I call a one and done approach to prep, so that hopefully you only have to take the test once. Because who wants to have to prep for it twice or three times, or invest in the time and effort and energy and money in taking it twice or three times? That being said, many students do end up taking it a second time. And as the gentleman previous to me was indicating, there can actually be advantages to retaking it because it shows the schools that you are more that you're very dedicated to the process and that you believe that improvement is possible, and that can speak to a positive mindset. So we just got some really good information about the GMAT, how it's used, what schools are looking for. In order to nail the test, well, let me ask you this. Think about any time that you've ever been competitive. Maybe you were a competitive athlete, or maybe you're competitive in a musical endeavor or in an intellectual endeavor. If you don't understand how you're being evaluated or what the scoring structure is in the environment in which you're competing, you don't really have an opportunity to maximize on the score. So that's where we have to start with the GMAT. We have to understand the basics of how it's scored so that you can get the highest possible results. So first things first, we need to understand that the GMAT is what we call computer adaptive by question. What this means is you get a question. If you get it right, you get a harder question, and therefore a somewhat more point-worthy question. But if you get that first question wrong, you're going to get an easier question and a somewhat less point-worthy question. So what does this mean? It means that you must choose an answer before you go to the next question. And once you go to that next question, you can't go back, because you get two questions down the line and then all of a sudden you go, oh, I remember how to do that question 2 questions ago. If they let you go back, then it would invalidate the in-between questions. So it's super, super, super important to recognize that on the GMAT, you only see a question once. If you get it right, you get a harder question. If you get the first question wrong, you get an easier question. So what does that really mean? Well, at the beginning of the section, you have like this much potential variation. And as you move, every question, that potential scoring variation gets smaller and smaller. So let me ask you, which questions do you think have the biggest impact on your score? Go ahead and type to me in the chat window. Whoops. Which questions have the biggest impact? Any ideas? Are they the ones at the beginning or the ones down at the end? It's going to be the ones at the beginning. So when you look at the layout of the test, which we're going to look at in just a second, yes, we're going to see like number of questions and time and everything, but you do not want to go into it saying, I have this amount of time per question, because that's not a valid way to approach the test. That's not how you're going to maximize your score. You want to spend maybe up to half of your time in the entire section on the first third of the test, so that you can really make sure that you're nailing those early questions, because that's going to help get you into a higher segment of the scoring range. Whereas if you just kind of race through, we all make careless mistakes. It's human nature. But if you race through and you make those careless mistakes, then that's going to potentially land you in a lower segment of the scoring range. So rule number one on the GMAT, absolutely make sure that you're investing your time early on in the test. So this gives you a bit of an idea of the layout of the test. You can see the sections, the number of questions, the time, and what kinds of material you're going to be taking a look at. Now notice, I'm looking off to the left because I actually have the full presentation there. Notice the content. Some of this content is going to be overlapping with the content that you see on the GRE. Now, one important difference between the GMAT and the GRE is that you do not have a calculator that you can use on the quantitative section of the GMAT. You do have a calculator available on the math section of the GRE. And I want to be clear, you don't have a calculator on the quantitative section on the GMAT. You will have access to a calculator on the integrated reasoning. So you want to make sure that you keep those straight in your head. All right. So you'll see you've got the quant section, the verbal section. There's also the integrated reasoning section. And then there is also an analytical writing assessment to take a look at as well. So when it comes to the overall score on the GMAT, we know that it's on a scale from 200 to 800, and that gets reported in 10-point increments. Now, those 10-point increments, the total score is based on your GMAT, or I'm sorry, your quantitative subscore and your GRE subscore. So what's really important to know about GMAT is, for example, if your math is really, really strong, you want to do everything that you can to push your math score absolutely as high as possible. If your verbal isn't as strong, you can almost hide it a little bit more on the GMAT because you can push your math super high, and the two of them together contribute to your 200 to 800 score. Or the other way around, if your verbal side is super strong, your English grammar is really good, your analytical reasoning is really solid, you can really focus on pushing that super high and maybe hide the fact that your math isn't as strong, because again, both of them together ultimately contribute to that 200 to 800 score. Any questions on GMAT at this point from a structure and scoring basis? Okay, not seeing anything coming in. So we're going to flip for just a moment and we're going to talk about GRE. Now, the GRE is a completely different test. It's offered by a completely different company and it's structured very differently. So again, you want to check with the schools that you're interested in applying to find out whether they have a preference. Historically, GMAT has been the test for MBA programs and GRE somewhat more for your master's or PhD programs. However, MBA programs are increasingly accepting the GRE. So again, check with the schools that you're interested in applying to find out what their requests are. So again, GRE is completely different structure-wise and scoring-wise than the GMAT. So let's take a look at that. Now, again, it's accepted by the majority of master's and doctoral programs. It is also, like I said, increasingly accepted not only by business schools, but also by law schools. Now, there's a couple of different, pardon me, there's the GRE, which is, comparable to the GMAT in some ways. But then there are also GRE subject tests. So if you're looking to apply for a master's or a PhD program in a very particular arena, again, you want to check to see whether they want any of these subject tests. Because here's the thing with the GRE, like for medical school, there's MCAT. For law school, there's LSAT. For business school, historically, it's been the GMAT. And then the GRE is kind of like the catch-all test for all of the other kinds of programs out there. So given that, there is no consistent pattern for which schools want GRE versus GRE subject tests versus GMAT. So if I could leave you with one piece of information, one recommendation, it would be check with the schools to find out what they want. Okay, so now let's take a look at the structure of the GRE. It has 3 sections, whereas the GMAT has 4. Technically, well, we'll get into that. So it starts with an analytical writing assessment. There's 1 section there. You'll have 2 essays. There's a quantitative section and a verbal section, but here's the deal. There are actually 2 quantitative math sections and 2 verbal sections. This is different than GMAT. GMAT, there's 1 math section and 1 verbal section. So you get 1 shot at each. Now, the GRE is also going to include an experimental section. This section is going to look just like one of the quantitative sections or one of the verbal sections, and it's going to be mixed in with them so that you don't know which one it is. Why do they do that? Well, because they're testing questions for use on future exams. And if you knew which one was the experimental and you knew it didn't count toward your score, you might not take it as seriously, which would throw their testing out the window. So just know structure-wise, you're going to have the essays, and then you're going to have 5 timed sections. 2 are going to be math that count toward your score, 2 are going to be verbal that count toward your score, and one of them is going to look like a math or a verbal, but isn't going to count, and you never know which one that is. So this gives us some insight as to the, the format and the content. So you'll see content-wise, we have similar concepts that are going to be tested in the math section as to what you're going to see in the math section in the GMAT. But again, do know that you are going to have a pretty basic on-screen calculator available on the GRE that you're not going to have on the GMAT. So then when we take a look at the verbal side of the test, there definitely is a huge amount of vocabulary on the GRE. So that's a major difference between the 2 tests. The GMAT does not have any questions that are expressly about knowing vocabulary. So that's a big consideration for you as you look at comparing the tests that you're going to take or which one you're going to choose. If your vocabulary isn't super strong, you might want to consider more taking the GMAT. However, if you're a personality that says, but I can learn a lot of vocabulary, then the GRE might be a good fit as well. Or if you're already an avid reader in the English language, then you may have a robust vocabulary and the GRE might be a better fit for you. So when it comes to scoring and understanding the structure, the GRE is also computer adaptive. However, it is not computer adaptive by question. It is what they call a multi-stage test. So what that means is that it is adaptive by section. Remember we said GMAT, there's just the 1 math section and it adapts question by question by question. On the GRE, you've got the 2 math sections. And so it adapts by section. So you're going to start with a fairly mid-range difficulty section. If you do really well on that section, then it is likely that you're going to end up in the harder second section of that same content area. So let's say we're talking just math, okay? You start with a mid-range difficulty math section, you do really well, you could land yourself in the higher difficulty math section. If you do okay on that first section, you could land in the mostly mid-range questions second section. And if you struggle on the first section, then it could land you in the easier second section. So what does this mean scoring wise? Well, we know that the score runs from a 130 to a 170. So more or less, if you end up in the easier second section, you could land more or less somewhere between a 130 and a 150 for your final score. If you land in the middle second section, it is likely that your score is going to land in the 140 to 160 range. But if you're able to get into the tougher second section, the likelihood is high that your score is going to land between a 150 and a 170. So depending on what your goals are on both tests, the goals impact what your strategy is going to be. If you're like, hey, I only need a 153 on the quant section, then you don't have to nail 100% accuracy in the first section. You could go for about 50% accuracy in the first section, and that'll land you in the mid-range second section. Make sense? So again, understanding the structure of the test and understanding how it's scored is really important for understanding how to maximize your score. So here's the deal on the GRE, because it adapts by section, you absolutely can move around within a section. You can't do that on the GMAT. So if you're in that first math section, one of the biggest things I would say is find all the questions that you know you can do really quickly and efficiently and correctly, and do those first, and then come back to the questions that are a little bit dicier. So let's talk about the types of questions. There's a couple of unique types of questions that you're going to see on the GMAT and the GRE. So on the GMAT, we have this type of question called data sufficiency. You don't always have to actually do all the math on this type of a question, but we need to understand why that's the case. So it's asking us ultimately whether the data provided is sufficient or is enough information to actually answer the question given. So if you take a look, we're going to end up with a question that looks like this, and it's just going to ask us, what is the value of A? And so we have to look at statement 1 and ask ourselves, is that enough to answer the question? Or statement 2, is that enough to answer the question? So let's take a step back for a second, okay? We know that we're going to have a singular question and then 2 statements. So if the first statement is valid and the second one is not, that's what answer choice A represents, that 1 is sufficient, but 2 is not. Answer choice B represents the exact opposite, that answer choice 1 is not sufficient, but statement 1 is not sufficient, but statement 2 is. Answer choice C always represents that alone, neither statement is sufficient, but if you put them together, they are. D always tells us that each statement independently is sufficient. And answer choice E always tells us that neither one alone is sufficient. And even if I combined them, it still wouldn't allow me to get to an answer. So let me clarify that when I say sufficient, sufficient means that it's enough to give you one answer. It's enough information to get you to a single value. So here's the deal. When you evaluate the first statement, if it is sufficient, the only answer choices you have left are going to be A and D. However, if statement 1 isn't enough to get us to a single value, then that puts us in answer choices B, C, and E. So let's take a look. Question here asks us, what is the value of A? If I look just at statement 1, is that enough to give me a single value of A? Well, if you look at it, you go, wait a second, if there's 2 variables, I need to have 2 equations. Then statement 1 alone is not going to be sufficient. So that means that we are going to end up in answer choices B, C, and E. A and D are automatically out. So then we have to look at statement 2 by itself. You have to pretend like blinders, put blinders over statement 1. You can't see it at all. You have to look just at statement 2. Well, statement 2 by itself also isn't enough, because if I have 2 variables, I need 2 equations. So that tells me that I can cross out answer choice B. But if I put them together, is that going to be sufficient? Are these 2 unique equations? They are. So if I put them together, if I put them together and I end up having 2 unique equations, then my answer is going to be C, because if I use them together, it will allow me to get to a single value of A. So the X's in the circle are a little off there, but the answer here is in fact C. So notice that I didn't actually have to do all the math, but I have to have an understanding that I need 2 unique equations to be able to solve the question. So this is a type of question that shows up on the GMAT. This type of question does not show up at all on the GRE. On the other hand, this type of question, what we call quantitative comparison, absolutely does show up on the GRE and does not show up on the GMAT. So in this case, we're given 2 different columns, quantity A and quantity B. And the answers to these are always going to be the same. They're always going to represent the same thing. You're going to choose A if A is always larger. You're going to choose B if B is always larger. You're going to choose C if the 2 values are always equal. And you're going to choose D if none of the others is always true. So notice that I put in the word always in there. That is super, super important to recognize. Okay. So if I take a look at this and I go, okay, well, I've got 2 different triangles. The sides are the same. Whoops, I didn't want to go there yet. The 2 sides are the same, but I noticed that the base of the first triangle is a little bit shorter. Well, when you're comparing two shapes like this, you want to exaggerate it. You want to imagine, like for triangle A, that it's a very, very steep triangle like this. And then for triangle B, you want to exaggerate the difference and imagine it's a very, very short triangle. Well, which one is going to end up having a taller height? The one that's got a narrower base or the one that has a wider base? It's going to be the one with the narrower base. Even though it's narrower by just a little bit, it is always going to have a taller height, which is why we can go ahead and say that A is going to be the answer, because that's never going to change. So one of the things that you want to be careful of on this type of a question is that you consider all the possible variations when you have a variable, including fractions, 0, negatives. Okay. Critical reasoning. If we take a look at the verbal side, on the GMAT, this is a style of question that you are going to see on the GMAT that you are not going to see on the GRE. So notice this question is asking us to express an assumption made in the argument. An assumption is something that the author must believe to be true. So I'll give you a second to go ahead and read that little article up at the top. And part of what we learn in a GMAT class or in GMAT tutoring is how to identify what we call the conclusion and the premises. The conclusion is the author's main point. Often it follows words like thus, therefore, as a result, or in conclusion. So the conclusion here would be that they have devoted, the European nations, they have devoted minimal effort to the development of educational programs for gifted and talented students. The premise is that these nations are philosophically opposed to the creation and maintenance of an elite social class. In the premise, we're talking about an elite social class. And in the conclusion, we're talking about gifted and talented students. Well, the author must believe that there's some connection between an elite social class and gifted and talented students. So we have to go find the answer that says, this is what the author has to believe to be true in order for this argument to stand. So if we take a look at it, A doesn't address both sides. B could, because it talks about gifted students and elite social class, so that could be viable. C doesn't talk about the elite social status. neither does D, and neither does E. But B is going to be the one that gets us the point. So that, again, this isn't a critical reasoning. This is a type of question we see on the GMAT. And I told you vocab was big on the GRE. This is an example of what we call a sentence equivalence question. So as you read this, I would invite you to put your own word into the blank. I might say confusing because he's typically quite lucid, but these are pretty confusing. So does realistic match? Not so much, nor does obvious. Abstruse might, like out there. Benevolent, not so much. Obscure could, and disparate doesn't. But here's the deal. You need to know that on this type of question, you have to get 2 answers. So that means abstruse must also be included. So this gives you a little bit of an insight as to some of the distinctions between the 2 tests. We could talk about this for hours. 20 minutes, 25 minutes is just enough to give you a little bit of a taste. But my hope is that it gives you a sense of the distinctions between the 2 tests. Here's what you need to understand. The test is one component of your application process. You've heard other folks talk about it. The tests are absolutely improvable. I wouldn't be working with Princeton Review 23 years later if I didn't see students' scores go up again and again and again. So the bottom line is you need to choose which one is a better fit for you, and then do everything that you can to nail that score. Thoughts, questions?
It's really great, Clarissa. We clearly understood the difference between the 2 tests, GMAT and GRE. There are a few questions here. Anant, can you please take up this question? How are CAT and GMAT different?
Yeah, I can take that question. Do you want me to start from some previous questions, or you want to start me from here? Because I can see there was questions related to difference in online and offline.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, let me start from there. There are some important points for people to understand here, that there are differences and then there are similarities. The main difference from a candidate standpoint is the AWS section is actually included in the test center model, whereas the current format of online does not have the AWA. The rest, everything remains the same. Also, in terms of section order flexibility, there are fixed sections order in the online, and you have the ability to move between sections, at least in the test center model. You can also preview your score post the test in a test center model. You actually cannot preview that in the online version. Other than that, the important point to note is that, if you're planning, your $250 actually entitles you to send your scores to 5 different programs. And if you're wanting to send an additional score, then the cost is US 35 in a test center delivery model exam. The score sending pattern, the score sending methodology in an online exam, it's actually unlimited. You can send it to unlimited programs. So this is an important point, but other than that, from a similarity standpoint, everything, the exam content, the structure, the scoring methodology, talk about the score validity, all of this remains the same. Maybe I can address the next question. What is the best source to prepare for GMAT, right? Sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead, Anand. So
as far as the best source, we would strongly recommend that you look at the official guides that are available on the mba.com store. Our advice is that you start off with the free prep that's available. There are a set of questions that are available. Without taking the GMAT, you can actually get a hands-on experience on the actual GMAT. You can compare between the 2 scores and get a full understanding of the GMAT. There is also an e-version of the official guide that's also available on the Wiley platform. So people who are unable to order because of some COVID restrictions, etc., can also use the e-versions of the official guide. Somebody's asked, is the GMAT going to be associated with more 2-year program? I'm not sure what the question means. Is it beyond the 100 that we mentioned? The list is actually, as I said, the GMAT is and this is more associated, I'm hoping, with the India context. But to answer that question, the GMAT is a ratified test from an Indian context. And all the full-time, as I said, PGDBM programs, the executive programs, except the GMAT. How are CAT and GMAT different? Well, both the exams serve a very different perspective. The CAT, as we know, actually is an institution agnostic exams and serves a particular set of institution. Whereas if you compare it with the GMAT is actually not a particular exam which is meant for a particular institution. The other difference is the nature of the test, the way it is given. The CAT happens on one particular single day, whereas GMAT gives you the flexibility of appearing at any time of the particular year. It's an adaptive exam. The two exams are very different in terms of structure and format. However, there are certain bridge programs that students can actually look at, which can help them better understand the differences and the similarities. Any other question, please?
I'm just going through. Okay, Clarissa has answered most of the questions on the chat.
Yeah, I've been tackling them by private chat or by chat as he's been chatting.
Yeah. Clarissa, can you please show the next slide?
Oh, sure. There you go.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think that's it actually. We have answered most of the questions. That's really a great session, and participants can send the questions if they have any to this mail ID, info@maniagroup.com. Please reach us in this number and visit our website. For any questions related to GRE or GMAT, please feel free to reach out to us.
Yep.
Thank you all. Thank you, Anand. That's really
Sorry, Nirmala. Sorry.
Yeah.
There is an unanswered question. I feel I should answer that.
Definitely, please.
Somebody's asked, is there a disadvantage while retaking the GMAT? Actually not. Absolutely not. It is the highest score that is picked up by the institute. And it is actually seen in a very positive light that you're determined to get to a business school. So please note that it is actually not a disadvantage, but an actual advantage if you are retaking the GMAT. It's just the reverse. Sorry, I'll leave it with that.
No, that's fine. Actually, Clarissa also said the same. Actually,
exactly. Thank you.
Your presentation was also there. It's a positive signal. Yeah, it's great. So thank you, Anil. Thanks, Clarissa. Thanks, everybody. Please reach out to us for any details about GRE or GMAT. Thank you all.